The next time I saw my friend was more than 2 weeks later. By that point, even sitting through class had become unbearably agonizing. I would spend the entire day on the roof waiting for her. And one day, completely out of the blue, she appeared before me once again. I couldn't say a word. There wasn't a trace remaining of the girl who had always laughed so happily. Her school uniform was tattered and torn, her hair looked like it had been hacked at with a knife. Her face, too, was full of bruises. Numerous wounds, as cruel as anything the tutors had inflicted on me, were openly visible even in the most conspicuous of places. Something terrible must have happened. Something so terrible I didn't even want to imagine it. And it must have lasted a horribly long time. And just like that, there were tears in my eyes. God didn't protect her. I couldn't protect her.
大丈夫。これは私が望んだことだから。彼に捨てられたくなくてしたことだから。
I hadn't asked a question, but she answered it anyway. Those clipped vague words weren't enough for me to understand what had really happened to her, but I knew she was lying. I knew many sad, horrible things must have happened. Things she couldn't possibly have wanted to happen. I slowly approached her, then wrapped my arms around her trembling body. It surprised even me. I hadn't expected myself to do any such thing.
ありがとう。ミチルは優しいね。そんなことない。そんなことあるよ。あなたは優しい子だよ。ねえ、噂は聞いてるでしょ。あれってその通りなんだ。まったくバカだと思うよ。
In the classroom, my friend had become subject to rumors. My classmates said she'd gotten to know a man decades older than her over the internet. A man with a wife and children. They said he treated her like his mistress. They said something about photos of her and that man getting scattered around the internet, about him making her have sex with other men. One morning there had been a naked photo of her taped on the top of my desk. I silently tore it off, shoved the paper into a trash can, and immediately left the classroom, slamming the door behind me as loudly as I could. But none of it mattered to me. No matter what sort of thing she'd done, it didn't change the fact that she was my best friend.
バカじゃないよ。私はバカだけど。そうだね。こんな私と仲良くしてくれるなんてバカかもね。そんなことないもん。私、学校で嫌われてるんだ。友達もいないの。でもね、誰も相手にしてくれないからあなたと友達になったわけじゃないからね。あなたのことがいいなって思ったから友達になったんだからね。それだけは本当。でも信じてくれないよね。こんな私だもんね。
I wanted to say, of course I know that, but my voice failed me. Felt as though a chunk of cardboard had wedged itself in my throat. I couldn't force out even a tiny squeak.
私はミチルのこと親友だってちゃんと思ってる。ごめんね、こんなに汚れた友達で。こんなんで本当にごめんね。
I wanted to tell her that she wasn't filthy, but I couldn't say a word. All I could do was hug her tightly.
私、彼のことが好き。彼がしろって言えばどんなことでもした。奥さんと別れてくれるなんて、そんなの最初から嘘だって分かってた。だけどそれでもよかったの。子供ができた時だって迷惑がかかるから病院だってちゃんと一人で行ったよ。もういいよ、話さなくていい。大丈夫だよ。他の人としろって言われても頑張った。相手が何人でも何回でも頑張った。でももう限界。だってあの人はもう私のこと好きじゃないから。
She gave me another pretend kiss on my cheek. I closed my eyes and returned the gesture. Watching me, she laughed for just a moment. And then she slipped out of my arms. Scraps of her uniform danced in the wind like feathers blown loose from the wings of a bird in flight. She put her hands on the fence and swung herself over to the other side, graceful as a dancer.
Michiru, もう私限界。あの人が私に興味のない世界になんて、あの人が存在しない世界になんて、いたくない。
Oh no. Straddling the border between roof and sky, standing on the line that divided this world from the next, she spoke to me. A single thought ran through my dazed brain. It's just like the first time we met.
先に行くね。
No. No. I wanted to say, I'll come with you. You're not the only one, you know. I'm not interested in a world without you in it. So if you're going, I'll come along. Just don't leave me behind. Don't leave me here alone. I wanted to tell her. You joked that you loved me once, but I really do love you. That's the reason I'm still alive today. I wanted her to know, but I couldn't speak or move. My body felt like it was encased in concrete. I couldn't lift a single finger.
さよなら、ミチル。
I wanted to say the words. We're best friends, aren't we? Let's die together. But instead, I just watched her in silence like a complete idiot. See, I was right. I'm the stupid one after all. Man. Oh man, that's so rough. Having a dear friend just kill themselves? In front of your eyes? While you stood there and can't do anything? You're just in shock? Oh man. I didn't know what to do. I just cowered, and then I tried to scramble over the rail to see her, to see the end. But I couldn't do it. No matter what, I just couldn't get myself over that fence. I could feel my feet giving way underneath me. I couldn't even keep myself upright. Why hadn't I died with her? I was right from the start. There was never a place for me here. Screwed up this big this time, didn't I? Shouldn't have let myself think I could become a normal person. Shouldn't have thought I could just find something like this happiness. In the end, it vanishes. The bubble pops. In that case, it wouldn't have been better never to have got my hopes up in the first place. Just like my parents stopped expecting anything of me, I should have stopped expecting anything from the world. I heard the wail of a siren and a chorus of horrified screams from far away, and then I fainted. My body still twined awkwardly around that fence. Just before I lost consciousness, I heard a sound like that click of a television set falling silent. I didn't know if it was a hallucination or not, but I heard it clearly. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed. It seemed I had been unconscious for quite some time. Normally there should have been police waiting at bed to question me, but Dad took care of all that. Probably less out of concern for me than out of his desire to keep this troublesome situation from dragging on. I thought they'd discharge me soon enough, but I discovered that my chronic chest pain had grown dramatically more intense. My body was no longer physically capable of enduring a normal life. The doctor said the shock of losing a close friend may well have advanced the progression of my disease, but I didn't really know if that was true. Either way, the pain in my heart was now so agonizing it could at times render me unconscious. My parents had more or less abandoned me, but I guess this miserable new development managed to move them to a pity. They decided to send me to America for a heart transplant operation. Personally, I wouldn't have minded just dying, but it seemed like those two wanted to feel like caring parents, so I decided I might as well go along with it. Things moved along behind my back, large amounts of money traded hands, although I didn't know the details. They didn't tell me much of anything about the donor, and I wasn't particularly interested either. All they said was I'd be receiving the heart of a brain-dead girl of the same age as me. I'm sure it must have been a really big, complicated operation, but since that day on the rooftop, I'd been living like an empty husk. Can't really say it felt like much of an ordeal. They carried me off on an airplane to a place where I couldn't understand a word anyone was saying. The doctor put me under anesthesia and I fell asleep. Before I knew it, I was right back in Japan. It really did seem to happen in the blink of an eye. I didn't have time to feel much of anything. My procedure apparently went about as smoothly as possible. They pumped me full of immunosuppressants to prevent my body from rejecting the new heart, but I recovered without any of the sickness that often resulted as a side effect. My reaction to this news was indifferent at best. Didn't even feel particularly strange having another person's organ inside my body. Sometimes I almost doubted whether they'd really operated on me. Of course, just touching the scar on my chest was enough to convince myself it had to be true, but really, what difference did it make either way? The lump in flesh inside of me constantly thumping away was different from the one that had been in there yesterday. That was all. Nobody was going to care. Nothing important had changed. My doctor celebrated my remarkable recovery from the surgery as a miracle. So enthusiastic, you might have thought my good fortune was his own. My parents had relieved expressions on their faces as well. Expressions that seemed to read, now we won't have to worry ourselves about this girl anymore. The many months I had spent in various hospitals came to an end, and I had begun to recuperate at home. That was when the first signs of the change began to appear. Apparently I was saying uncharacteristic things to my parents. I was talking and behaving in ways I usually wouldn't. It was as if I'd become a completely different person. My parents were incredulous at first, half suspecting some kind of elaborate prank, but as they knew, I wasn't exactly a practical joker by nature. I wasn't consciously aware of any of this. My alternate personality came at the price of gaps in my memory. Maybe I was sleepwalking, or turning into a different person without even realizing it. A doctor diligently studied my brain activity and asked me all sorts of questions, but in the end, he could only offer a vague conclusion. This phenomenon cannot be explained by modern medicine. Ultimately, the adults decided that the powerful psychological impact of losing a friend in front of my eyes had led changes in my personality. But again, I didn't really care either way. I responded with my usual, "Oh, that's so." The gaps in my memories became more frequent, and as time passed, they grew longer and harder to ignore. The other me, who showed up in these chunks of lost time, seemed surprisingly competent. From what I gathered, she was much more sociable than I was, and a lot better at schoolwork as well. One night, I noticed dinner was a little extravagant. Dad smiled across the table and told me it was a reward for trying so hard at my studies lately. It was kind of a strange experience, but I didn't really mind. I mean, if things were going smoothly, who cared if I remembered doing the things that I was being praised for or not? As this pattern continued, I found myself acquiring a number of friends as well. Of course, I'd gotten to know them during my blank spaces in my memory, so I didn't really know what sort of people they were. Without any effort on my part, lots of people began greeting me in a friendly tone on the road to school. After saying hi, they'd usually ask, "What's wrong, not feeling so good today?" Seems like they saw the usual me as the sick Michiru, and the other person who showed up in those blank periods of lost time as the normal, cheerful Michiru.
どうした?具合が悪そうだな。
I was lying down in my room one evening when Dad stopped by to check up on me.
らしくないぞ。いつもの元気な道を見せてごらん。
Not knowing what else to do, I forced a strained smile onto my
大
face.
丈夫。明日には元気になっているさ。今日のお前とはさよならだな。
Smiling, Dad left the room and closed the door behind him. And all of a sudden, an image flashed into my head. An image of a girl frozen in flight. It was the girl who had left me so abruptly, my best friend who had abandoned this world. Her final goodbye echoed inside my head, rebounding off the walls of my skull. The word was terribly sharp. Every time it clanged against the bone, it felt as though someone was drilling me open from the inside. Trembling with fear and pain, I dove into my bed in search of refuge. Greasy sweat broke out on my forehead. I swallowed a handful of the sleeping pills my doctor had prescribed, pulled the blanket over my head, and squeezed my eyes shut. If I can't get past this, I'll become the sheriff of Michiru again. I can't break down now. I silently repeated those words to myself. And soon enough, drowsiness wrapped up in a thick, sticky cocoon, blanket and all. Finally, I'll be able to sleep. I'll pull through after all. It was just as those thoughts were running hazily through my mind, just as I stood on the border between reality and dreams, when I heard the unfamiliar voice from outside my blanket.
大丈夫だよ。安心して。心配しなくていいんだよ。
I didn't understand the slightest that this was supposed to be alright. Hearing the voice of some strange woman as I tried to fall asleep really didn't seem to qualify.
私が君の弱さを引き受けてあげる。これからずっと一緒なんだから。うん。親友になろう。
The instant I heard those words, I felt my heart pound violently. A sharp white-hot pain spread from my chest throughout my entire body, as if traveling through my blood vessels.
親友なんて言わないで。私の親友は一人しかいない。
I remember the doctor offhandedly mentioning a phenomenon known as cellular memory. In rare cases, patients receiving heart transplants had seemed to inherit aspects of the previous owner's tastes or memories. He didn't seem to believe in the idea, but maybe it was real. Maybe that had just happened to me. No, this wasn't anything so minor. The former owner's entire personality had slipped inside me, complete and distinct from my own. And now she was talking to me, declaring herself my best friend. I wasn't about to put up with that. Another best friend was the last thing I wanted. Throwing off the covers, my pulse pounding in fear of my own body, I shouted at the disembodied voice. I couldn't even tell if this was reality or some insane nightmare. My terror escalated into frenzy. I ripped out clumps of my own hair, bit my own arms, and kicked things all over the room until my feet bled. But it wasn't enough. I grabbed a box cutter from my desk, grasped it tightly in my hands, and listened carefully, trying to figure out where the voice was coming from. The voice was the cause of this pain. It flowed through my body with the blood thumping out of my heart, bringing agony with it. I had to get that voice out of my body. I had to, or I was going to go crazy. With that thought, I cut at my wrist with the blade, trying to drain the voice out of me along with my blood, but no matter how my arm bled, the voice remained securely inside my body. In that case, I had no choice. I needed to uproot it directly. I needed to get rid of that foreign entity pulsing away inside of me. I pointed the blade at my own chest and stabbed as hard as I could. It wasn't the sharpest blade, but it broke the skin easily enough. Slowly, it gouged its way through my flesh just a little further, and I'd reach the heart. The invasion would be over soon. I'd be rid of the voice. I felt relief washing over me, but just then I smelled that distinctive mixture of cigarettes and strange women and realized that my father had entered the room.
どうしたミチル。なぜだ。
Before I knew it, my room had become a disaster scene. The shattered and torn remnants of my belongings stained dark red with splashes of fresh blood. The box cutter fell from my hands and hit the ground with a dull thunk. The sound abruptly brought me back to reality. Dad's familiar face was so contorted that he looked like an entirely different person. I had to smile, had to reassure him. But different words came out of my mouth.
ねえパパ、私狂っちゃったの？